How do you see the last question here? How do you see what would be the solution to this war in Ukraine? Do you see peace talks or the complete defeat of Ukraine?
Complete defeat of Ukraine. First of all, again, my whole thing is being honest, so I'm going to be honest. Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist anymore as a nation state. It's lost that right. It forfeited it. I'm sorry. It was always a fake state. I'm very sympathetic to the arguments made by the Russians in the lead up to the special military operation that talked about Ukraine being an artificial construct. I'm sympathetic to, the role played by Lenin in artificially promoting the concept of nations where no nations existed. That was part of the communist policy of nation building to create the Soviet Union. I'm sympathetic to the argument made about, Khrushchev attaching, Crimea in an artificial manner. The post-war, decisions made by Stalin to attach this, to attach that. It's a Frankenstein nation. And like the monster Frankenstein, it may look like a human, but it ain't human. And at the end of the day, it's got to be destroyed. Ukraine is a fundamentally poisoned country. What makes it more poison than anything else is Western Ukraine. These people are incompatible with the Russian nation. They don't belong as part of the Russian nation. But here's the problem. They're poisoned. Literally, these are people who have been poisoned for decades by the ideology of Stepan Bandera. They could have been saved had there been complete denazification in the post-war environment. But Khrushchev brought an end to that. Again, the West doesn't understand what happened between 1945 and 1954, when the CIA continued to fund money using German Gehlen organization, which had close links to these Banderas because of their complicity with the Germans during the slaughter of Jews, the slaughter of Poles, the slaughter of Russians, and they continued to receive money and training from the CIA, from the British, from the Germans to continue a struggle that from 1944 to 1945 cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in a war that never ended until 1954, when the survivors either fled or taken prisoner and sent to the Gulag. In the Gulag, they should have been denazified or died. I'm sorry. If you're a Nazi, there ain't no sympathy here. The best thing to happen for a Nazi is for you to decide to put a bullet in your head and end your life. If you don't want to, I'll be glad to put a bullet in your head. But if we decide that you want to live, then you're going to rot in a prison until we can re-educate you. And I don't know if that's possible with true believers. But they sent these people off. Two things. One, the people that fled were given safe haven. Safe haven in Canada, the United States, in Great Britain, in Australia. Safe haven, where they built camps and they started to poison the minds of the next generation of Western Ukrainians, the Banderists. They exist here. Right here in New York. They call themselves Banderists. They're proud of it. They parade with this damn photograph. They light torches. They wear the Nazi uniform. And we say it's wonderful because we call them Ukrainian. They're not Ukrainians. They're Nazis. End of story. Done. But they live now. They thrive. And they send all this money back. And they create this ideological base. You see, Western Ukrainian national identity doesn't exist on the Russian national thing. It exists in diaspora. And the diaspora feeds this poison. But again, they were stripped. They either fled, they went to prison. What's left? A vacuum. But then Khrushchev in 1956, only 3 years after these bastards were sent to prison for 25 years, they should have rotted and died in the Gulag. But no, Khrushchev opens the doors, calls them political prisoners, frees them, and they come back and they insinuate themselves over the course of the next decades into Ukrainian society, Ukrainian government, with the backing of the CIA. The CIA funded the Banderas operating in Ukraine from 1954, when they stopped the military operations, up until 1990. And even after that, the CIA maintained their links so that in 2014, this was a CIA orchestrated, controlled coup. Done. These people exist. They can't exist. I'm sorry. So Russia needs to win this war. Look, when you have a disease, and Western Ukraine is a disease. It's a diseased part of Europe, an absolute diseased part of Europe. What do you do about it? Pretend it doesn't exist? No, it exists. It has to be excised. You have to cure the disease. How do we do that? The first thing is get rid of the host. Ukraine can't exist when this is done. I'm on Team Medvedev right now. That's a saying. There's an old movie about vampires here in the United States. You're either Team Vampire, you're Team Werewolf. So I'm Team Werewolf here, Medvedev. And he straight up said, can't exist anymore. I didn't used to believe in that. I didn't want to believe in that. It sort of went against my grain. But when I take a look at how far down the path NATO has taken Ukraine, because this is the fault of NATO. NATO made this decision. The United States made this decision, but we have taken it so far. How do you come back? How do you come back? If somebody could show me a path back to get to where I could say that the concept of a independent, sovereign, viable Ukraine is a reality without guaranteeing that this war is going to be fought again. Because that's the key aspect of it. This war, from the Russian perspective, can never be fought again. But if you allow this rotten body called Ukraine to exist without curing the disease, then the war will happen again. It will never end. Just like it never ended when the CIA breathed life into the Banderas in the post-World War II environment and kept them alive in diaspora, funding them, insinuating them in the government, controlling them. So it has to end. It has to end. And it ends by the death of Ukraine. And Zelensky knows this. That's why he refuses to negotiate a surrender. Zelensky's bought into Team America. And he's going to receive this aid up until the very end. And then he's going to flee. That's what he thinks is going to happen. He's the most corrupt man and one of the most corrupt men in the world. In addition to the 300 plus million that he stole from Ukraine prior to the war, according to Seymour Hersh, he's come up with a scheme to take another 400 million. That's just Zelensky alone by himself. So I'm sure he has properties. People talk about properties in in Miami and elsewhere that he'll flee to if he's given the chance. And that's okay. He can go rot in exile. But the future of Ukraine will not be Volodymyr Zelensky. His government will be erased, annihilated. The people who support it will have to be re-educated or killed or sent into diaspora. But whatever comes out of this war, this is just a harsh, realistic appraisal. Whatever happens at the end of this war, the poison that is modern Ukraine cannot be allowed to exist, or else this war will just continue. And I think, again, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I'm somebody who is prone to extreme conclusions. They're rational, but they're extreme. I'm not a middle ground kind of person, but I like middle ground people. I really do, because it's sort of the middle ground is how you get out of conflict. My approach, a lot of conflict. So I like the middle ground. I want the middle ground. You know who could provide the middle ground? Europeans could, but not Europe. Forget Europe. Europeans, French, Germans, Italians, they could provide the middle ground by articulating common sense approaches towards dealing with Ukraine, dealing with Russia, etc. But they don't exist. They have forfeited the policy formulation to the United States. And the United States is all about the destruction of Russia. And the United States has never been about the preservation of a truly sovereign Ukraine. Ukraine was always a tool, never a nation. Ukraine was always a weapon, never a people. And so we've allowed, in order to weaponize this tool, the United States has allowed the people and the nation of Ukraine to be destroyed. And they are fundamentally destroyed today. We've taken a Frankenstein that could have been turned into a human maybe, and we've just turned it into a monster. And that monster must die. And I think the Russians are getting there. I mean, look, the Russian people, they didn't want this war. I think everybody should understand, even when Putin started the special military operation, it wasn't fully understood. A lot of Russians listened to his speech, in which he explained it, and went, nah, I don't want this, boss. We don't want this. I think you could have easily said that 60-70% of the Russians were not on board with the special military operation when it first happened. That doesn't mean they were anti-Putin, but it means they were uncomfortable about this war. It just wasn't their thrill factor. They didn't want to do this. It just wasn't there. But if you've taken a look what's happened in Russia, they have gradually come to a realization that Ukraine is just a poison state. It is a poison state. That can't be part of the Russian nation as it's currently configured. And yet it is part of the Russian nation. Therefore, you must cleanse the poison, free the disease. They've also come to recognize, as Vladimir Putin did early on, that this isn't about Russia versus Ukraine. This is about Russia versus the West, versus NATO, versus the United States. This is an existential struggle for Russian national survival. And so when you have that realization, when you're suddenly confronted with the fact that this war was designed to kill you, that's a harsh reality. It went from being, man, why are we doing this? What are we doing this? To, holy cow, these guys are trying to kill us. Therefore, we have to destroy them. We have to defeat them. So there's a growing recognition in Russia that Ukraine can no longer exist. Europe is going to reach that conclusion, because I think Europe is recognizing that the United States has created poison. And for Europe to allow this poison to leak into every aspect of it, to poison their politics, their economy, everything, create the potential perpetual conflict, which is all Ukraine is. Think about it. If you want to have a Ukraine continued in the vision of Volodymyr Zelensky, you're talking about perpetual war, a never-ending war. There will never be peace. Ever be peace. Perpetual conflict. Does Europe want perpetual war? The answer is no. And so eventually Europe is going to say, goodbye, Ukraine. It was nice knowing you, but we're not going to sit back and save you. There's nothing to save here. You're poison, you're cancer, you must be excised, etc. Which leaves the United States. And the United States has shown throughout history, again, when we say we support somebody, we don't. It's just a statement of fact. We're not your friends. We don't like you. We don't want to like you. We only want to use you. We want to use you to promote what's good for America. You are a tool that we choose to weaponize. But what happens when you lose a battle? You drop the tool and you leave. And that's what we did in South Vietnam. That's what we did in Afghanistan. That's what we're doing in the Middle East. And that's what we're going to do in Ukraine. We don't care about the Ukrainian people. That's the greatest tragedy here, because the Ukrainian people actually think America's there to help them. But there's going to be the realization, the same ugly realization that's met by everybody we abandoned in history, that we are not there for you. We don't care about you. Yes, we'll have some token money put aside so we can bring in some refugees. We did that with the South Vietnamese. We did that with the Afghans. And we'll do it with the Ukrainians. We'll bring some Ukrainians in. It'll be easier to absorb them because they're white. We like white people here in America. Those South Vietnamese, that was tough, but we had a relation. We did it. There's a lot of Japanese in the East Coast, so we could just absorb it because one Asian looks like another. The Afghans are a little brown, but we'll do okay. We'll take some of them, but not too many. Not too many because they're Muslim. We don't want too many Muslims. But Ukrainians, they're white, they're Christian. Yeah, we'll take some Ukrainians. That's it. And I'm being sort of farcical here, but it's the truth. America is a deeply racist nation. A deeply racist nation. If you don't believe that our foreign policy is driven by racism, you know nothing about our foreign policy. But we don't care about Ukraine. We don't even know. All the Ukrainians are running around with their, we're Ukrainian, they're this, we're that. Americans don't care. We put the flag out there, that's it. Beyond the flag, we don't know anything about you, and we don't want to know anything about you. All we want you to do is die in our cause. That's it. And how could it be anything else? Understand that the American people continue to support a conflict that's taken hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives. And we're not crying. We're not weeping. We're not sickened. You know who is sickened by this? The Russian people. They care more about the Ukrainians than we do. This is destroying them. This hurts them. This is painful. There's no joy in Russia for winning this war. There's nausea. There's a sickness. There's regret. But there's no joy. Yet here in America, we have Congress passing a resolution, a victory in Ukraine resolution. It's a suicide pact. It says that we must pass a law that says it's the policy of the United States for Ukraine to take back Crimea and the Donbass and Zaporizhia and Zaporozhia without understanding, as Dmitry Medvedev just reminded everybody. I hope everybody watched that speech that he gave the other day, where he said, all you guys out there that think that Russia's bluffing. Oh, Russia's threatening nuclear weapons. Russia's this, Russia. He said, we don't bluff. He said, I'm a former president of Russia. I know what these weapons are. When the time comes, you must have a steady hand over these weapons, ready to use them. He said, if you don't think we're going to use them, you don't know us. And if you threaten the survival of Russia, we will destroy you. 100% guarantee. And one of the definitions of threatening the survival of Russia is to strip away Russian territory from Mother Russia. Crimea is Russia. Zaporizhia is Russia. Kherson is Russia. Donetsk is Russia. Lugansk is Russia. And any American policy says that they're going to return to Ukraine. Policy says that we want to commit suicide. And that's what Ukraine has become. A suicide pill. It is a giant suicide pill. And America is telling people, swallow it. And Russia's saying, if you do, you all die. That's why Ukraine has to be gone, disappeared, not exist. You can call it a republic of Russia, but sovereign Ukraine, especially a sovereign Ukraine attached to the poison of Bandera, can't be allowed to exist because it's only a suicide pill.
Understand it. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. When you gonna travel to Russia?
Hopefully I'll leave Saturday.
You can stay there for 1 month.
I have, first of all, I'm going there because my book was published in Russia, which is a great honor. I mean, I can't express how happy this makes me feel because it was a book about Russia. It was about the Soviet Union. It's about Russia. It's a book that I wrote so that the American people could be exposed to the history of the INF Treaty, the importance of disarmament, and perhaps as importantly, the concept of Russians and Americans working together in cooperative fashion to achieve mutually, a verifiable peace. Wow, what a concept. So it's like a template of hope. But, any message has to, message is part of communication. And to communicate, you can't just be speaking to the wind. You have to have somebody on the receiving end. And in this case, the person on the receiving end must be the Russians. So for the Russians to say, we want to publish your book in Russia so that the Russian people could be exposed to the same message that I'm trying to get to the United States, wow, we just created this potential for communication. We've created something where people can begin to talk. So I'm thrilled to death to be able to go over there. I'm going to 11 different locations throughout the whole expanse of Russia. I'm going to have the opportunity to meet with Russian people, see Russia, communicate to them about this. And I'd like to believe that, look, I don't want to elevate myself, but, I refer to the experience of Van Cliburn, the Texas musician, the piano player, who in 1958 went to Moscow to participate in the Tchaikovsky Music Festival, and he won it, first place. And in doing so, he won the hearts of the Russian people, the Soviet people. They fell in love with this guy, an American, a young man. He was 25 at that time, from Texas, who had appreciated their culture, could play their music perfectly, with a little bit of a Texas flair to it, but still perfectly. And it wasn't just the Russians that appreciated him. He came back, and they gave him a ticker tape parade down New York City. In the history of the Avenue of Heroes, we put generals, presidents, politicians, astronauts, firefighters, policemen. They've all gone down there. Only one musician has been given that honor, and that was Van Cliburn. And so, I don't want to put myself up at the level of Van Cliburn, but what I've always said to people is, you have to discover your inner Van Cliburn. Each one of us has a little piece of Van Cliburn in us, which means we have to go on that journey. We have to go out to meet, learn, educate, come back, and do the same thing.
Exactly.
And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to discover my inner Van Cliburn. I'm going to go over there and try and replicate at least somewhat what he was able to accomplish. And And we'll see. I just I just feel really good about this trip. It's a tough trip, and we're going there. Russia's at war right now. It's tough.
Yeah.
And politically, it's going to be tough to get that message across. But if you don't do it, then what? Do we wait for Medvedev's hand to push that button? Do we wait for the world to end? You got to do it now. You know, the toughest part of every journey is that first step. But I'm going to make that first step, and then I think the journey will define itself.
Good. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a good trip.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.